All right. So here's the story with Purim. Purim was celebrated Thursday evening, all day yesterday, and it ended at sundown on Friday. Of course, we didn't meet during that time, so we have to get our Purim energy out this morning. So we're not observing Purim. We're simply celebrating this holiday a few hours, 12 hours, a little bit delayed. So most of you are familiar with what Purim is. We find the story of Purim in the book of Esther. And the point of Purim is given in 9:28 rather. So these days, what we're going to learn about in the passage, were to be remembered and celebrated throughout every generation. So observance and celebration throughout every generation. This is why every year we read through the book of Esther, because it is to be remembered. Every family, every province, and every city. And these days of Purim were not to fail from among the Jews, or their memory fade from their descendants. So the Jewish people have generally been pretty good about celebrating Purim. It's a fun holiday. It's a dress-up day. It's a party day, kind of like a Jewish Mardi Gras. And of course, this year, a little bit different on the way it was celebrated. A lot of virtual Mardi Gras, virtual holiday revelry on Zoom and various things. But nonetheless, a celebration and a remembrance of what God did in preserving his people. I say what God did in preserving his people. Nowhere in the book of Esther is God mentioned, but his presence is assuredly felt. For most of us, we don't have daily conversations where God speaks to us and directs us specifically as to what to do. And so we find a very similar situation. We find something that seems relevant to the 21st century in the story of Esther, in that God is not mentioned in the foreground, but he's very much in the background, always operating and preserving his people. Well, you'll see what I'm talking about when we get through the book. We'll talk about it a little bit in a moment. But when we talk about Purim customs and obligations, there is the reading of the Megillah, the scroll. Some of you may remember Megillah Gorilla from that was a Hanna-Barbera in-joke for the Jewish creators, Megillah Gorilla. A Megillah is simply a scroll, and you have to read the scroll every year. And the question is, do you have to read the whole Megillah? And technically, yes, we're not going to be reading the whole Megillah, but that's where the phrase, the whole Megillah, in case you know. That's not to be confused with Megillah Cuddy. That's a different ethnicity, a different people group whatsoever. This is Purim for the Jewish people and for those who are sympathetic. You know the story of Purim, the story of Esther, if you've read it before. We're going to be reading passages, and then we're going to be summarizing some passages because we're looking at a limited amount of time to go through this. And the story of Purim, Passover, the story of Purim begins with an introduction to the king, King Ahasuerus. And he's having a banquet. It's a big, giant banquet for all the nobles and all that. And his queen is having a banquet with the women. And so the king is entertaining, and after several days of revelry, he wants to show off his beautiful wife and orders Queen Vashti to appear before the nobles, which is having a party, and to appear before them so that they could admire her beauty. So this was going to be something that was not savory for Vashti to parade herself about, and so she called a strike and she decided not to show up with her entourage of beautiful women. And so the queen blew off the king and his nobles and at their banquet and said, I am not coming to appear like some show pony, some performing monkey to dazzle your colleagues, your friends, with my beauty and with my body. And so she and her companions said, how about you have a day without a woman and see how that works out for you? And of course, Queen Vashti is banished. That's the end of her. And we don't see Vashti again. She will never again be in the presence of the king. Now, whether that is because she literally is banished from his presence and she's sequestered somewhere in one of the nooks of the castle, of the palace, never again to be seen by the king, or whether it meant that she suffered a more severe consequence, taking her off the playing field, it's arguable. And there are different opinions because the text doesn't specify. However, what is specified is that in Vashti's absence, since he is de facto now without a queen, the king wants to find, King Ahasuerus wants to find a new queen. And he does it the way all wise kings go looking for their next wife, has a television program called The Bachelor, and a parade of women come before him, and finally one gets the rose. Now, it's funny, but in reality, that's really what's happening here in chapter 2 of Esther. There is not a citywide, but a nationwide, all the provinces, an empire-wide call to have, and the king is the bachelor. And he is going to be selecting over a course of a year, not only who's got the best gams, but he's going to have some very serious private time with all the women who are gathered together, all the beautiful virgins who are gathered together to see if they can gain his favor and become the next queen, to see the one who is going to be presented the final rose. So that would have been an interesting time, as you can imagine, for the king. Say, it's good to be the king. Not so good to be one of the beautiful virgins of the province, because they were all summoned, and the king often was required himself, frankly, to sample the merchandise. It's good to be the king, So Esther, Jewish girl living in Persia during that time, she is beautiful and a virgin, and so she's qualified, and so she comes along as well. And of course, basically the story that you're going to see here in chapter 2, that Esther is the one who is going to be chosen. This young Jewish girl who has been raised by her cousin Mordecai because she is without parents. So we'll pick up the narrative right here in Esther 2. Now, you have your groggers in your hands, and when you hear the name Mordecai, you're going to cheer. Hurrah, huzzah, hey, ooh, whatever. Your cheer of choice. And when you see the name Haman, or hear the name Haman, you're going to make noise on your groggers. So, because I know you're itching right now, let's simply, since I said the name of Haman, let's just get out of your system right now, okay? Go test them out, have a good time, have a ball. Right, okay, good. Good. Miss Georgia made homemade noisemakers with pinto beans for the kids, so that I know they're having a great time. I hope she took 2 Advil and will call me in the morning. Well, let's read the passage at hand. Again, this is the Megillah. This is a abridged version of the Megillah. The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she found favor and kindness with him more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. She got the final rose, and she got the crown. She is now Mrs. King, i.e. the queen of Persia. But the secret of the chapter 1 and chapter 2, where she's introduced, is that the king does not know. Nobody knows that she's Jewish. So, mum's the word, hush, hush, hush. The king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his princes and his servants. He also made a holiday for the provinces and gave gifts according to the king's bounty. Esther apparently had no problem showing up for this and unveiling her beauty for the king's princes and servants, etc., when she was installed as queen. When the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai, whose huzzah was that? That was very good. Okay. Well huzzed. Good, yes. And this guy was sitting at the king's gate. I want you to notice that the story of Esther is really, at its core, a political thriller. It's a political story of intrigue and machinations and plot twists and all manner of interesting concepts that sell a lot of books in our market today. But this is really, I would say, this is, of all the books in the Bible, this is perhaps the most political, overtly political book in the Bible. So Mordecai sitting at the king's gate, huzzah, you got your huzzah already. Esther had not yet made known her kindred or her people. In other words, hush, 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 mum's the word that she's Jewish, even as Mordecai, her cousin, had commanded her. For Esther did what Mordecai told her, as she had done when under his care. He had raised her. Right? They're not peers. Mordecai's a little older. After these events, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman. Now this is where the villain of the piece, the antagonist of the piece, is introduced. And he's introduced as the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and established his authority over all the princes who were with him. So, of all the junior officials, of all the cabinet, of all the various different people in the court, you now have this guy who is elevated above all his colleagues to serve as the number two, the premier, if you will, for the king, the prime minister, the man who gets things done for the king. And what's interesting when we meet this individual, whose name I will not mention because I want to limit our groggers, he is identified as an Agagite. And so most of you wouldn't know an Agagite from a mosquito bite, but nonetheless, when we talk about biblical background, every Jew reading this understands what's being communicated here, that this individual is a descendant of the Amalekites. And their king, Agag, was the prototypical enemy of the Jewish people. Let me take a side step here for a moment and reveal what it says in Deuteronomy. Remember what Amalek, the nation, led by Agag is not a name necessarily. We don't really know if it's a title or a name, or if the king's, Agag the first, Agag the second, or if it just means that he is the ruler. But nonetheless, Amalek ruled by Agag. Amalek did to you, remember that, when you came out of Egypt, how he met you along the way and attacked you with all the stragglers at your rear when you were faint and weary. In other words, real stinkers. And he did not fear God. It shows he didn't fear God because he attacked the Jewish people. Therefore, it shall come about when the Lord your God has given you rest from all your surrounding enemies. In other words, when you conquer the land, which will happen under Joshua, and you rest from your conquest in the land which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance to possess, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. You must not forget. What do you think happened? They forgot. okay? And they did not blot out Amalek from under heaven. They don't blot out Amalek until 4 centuries later, under Saul, who is commanded to destroy all the Amalekites, and it's what's called the Cherem curse, which is a complete obliteration down to the property. The animals, the property, a complete obliteration, so that their name is literally remembered no more. Some people will write the name of the bad guy of the Esther story on the bottoms of the soles of their shoes, and they will stamp their feet when his name is called in the story to blot out the name of Amalek from mankind's memory. So we see in Samuel, this is where Saul messes up. So Saul defeated the Amalekites from Havilah, as you go, Havilah, Nagila, Havilah, as you go to Shur, raise your hand if you're sure, which is east of Egypt. He captured Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed the people, all the people, with the edge of the sword. Good for him. But Saul and the people spared Agag. So Agag, in a few verses, is gonna bite it, is gonna die by the hand of Samuel. But nonetheless, some of the Amalekites, some of his descendants, must have slipped through, because that's why you have a descendant of Agag who finds himself right there in Persia, some distant relative who should have been destroyed, but nonetheless stands as even more than Pharaoh would, stands as the archetypical enemy of the Jewish people. So all the king's servants, that was a little bit of a sideways road, but I think important to understand why these events are happening. All the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage. And people get really curious as to why Mordecai doesn't bow down. Here's a new rule. When I'm referencing the character but not reading from the actual Megillah, let's refrain from exercising our noise-making abilities. So you have this really weird thing. And it's going to be, why is this guy not bound? Because he's a Jew. That's the answer that Mordecai gives. He's a Jew. So, God bless me. But the question is, are all the Jewish people in Persia not bowing down to any individuals? Because they're all Jewish. What makes Mordecai special? Or is Mordecai, let's assume that he is special, is he not bowing down only before Haman and bows down before other officials? What's going on here? It seems a little bit odd, the explanation that's given that Mordecai says because he's a Jew. It's not an odd tactic for Mordecai, knowing that in the story, Haman has been identified as an Agagite. So a Jew to bow down, not to a Persian, but for a Jew to bow down to an Agagite is something that Mordecai could not stomach, because he shouldn't even be living according to Torah. So that's why, to the best of my understanding, because some people disagree, but I think that's the best explanation as to why Mordecai is not bowing down before this guy, and and not before other Persians as well. It doesn't mention Mordecai's got a thing. He's got a bad back. He doesn't stoop before anybody. He simply doesn't bow before Haman. So anyway, but Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, why are you transgressing the king's command? Now it was when they had spoken daily to him, and he would not listen to them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's reason would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. So this happens day after day after day. Mordecai is making a very public act of civil disobedience. This is the king's command. Haman is prime minister, premier, whatever you want to give him the title. Why isn't Mordecai day after day after day bowing down before him? A very public act of civil disobedience, because for Mordecai, it is better to obey God rather than man. Now, there's nothing that says that thou shalt not bow down to an Agagite, but Mordecai is drawing a logical, theological, and philosophical and political conclusion based upon a theological principle that Amalek needed to be wiped out. Okay, and Saul lost his dynasty, lost his kingdom, because he did not kill King Agag. So Mordecai wants to honor God. Again, God not mentioned here, but if you read between the lines and see, well, this must be why Mordecai is doing what he is doing. Not just because he's some suicidal Jew looking for trouble. When Haman saw that Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage to him, Haman was filled with rage. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they told him who the people of Mordecai were. Therefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. So, you don't want to mess with a people who are sprinkled throughout your kingdom, even though you hate their guts. So it's very clear that he, because of the civil disobedience of one individual, which is an affront, a shame, a loss of face to this political individual who was elevated to a very high position, second only to the king, he wants to take out his frustration, his rage, his upset on Mordecai's people. Okay? The entire race, the entire nation of individuals living within the kingdom, but his hand politically is restrained because they are throughout the whole kingdom. And it would create more problems for him than it would solve. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, that's the month, not the car, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, Pur, that is the lot, was cast before Haman. Yep. You're getting very unenthusiastic. You're losing a lot of enthusiasm here. Okay, good. Pace yourself. This is a marathon, not a sprint, okay? The cast before Haman from day to day and from month to month until the 12th month, that is the month Adar. So, rolling some holy craps, and they're rolling to find out a special day. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people. So again, he's thought about it a lot. He wants to destroy these people. They're scattered throughout. He's got power, but he didn't have that much power politically. So he's got to now, he picks a day. He said, okay, if we accomplish this on one day, now all I have to do is get the powers that be, or the power that be here, that is, to sign off on it. Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there's a certain people. It's scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. In other words, like mealworms in a bag of flour. Their laws are different from those of all other people, and they do not observe the king's laws. Well, one didn't observe the king's laws. So it is not in the king's interest to let them remain. Oh, I've heard slimy political talk like this on C-SPAN. It reminds me so much. But nonetheless, he's laying out his case. It's not in the king's interest. It's not in the national interest, which of course is your interest, O king, to let them remain in our nation. They are domestic, what's the word we'll call them? Domestic terrorists. No, we won't call them domestic terrorists. That would go beyond. But we would maybe domestic insurrectionists, perhaps, people who are going to create a problem for your rule. It'd be so much easier if they weren't around. If it's pleasing to the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who carry out the king's business and put it into the king's treasuries. Then the king took a signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. So apparently Haman's case was persuasive. The king said to Haman, "The silver is yours, the people also, to do with them as you please." When Mordecai heard all that had been done by this slimy loser Haman, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and a sign of mourning is to tear your clothes. Jewish people still do it today when they mourn. They rent their clothing. Put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and wailed loudly and bitterly. No justice, no peace. No, he is making a public demonstration. Right? So again, this is a very political document, and he is demonstrating in the public square, and wailed loudly and bitterly. He has a grievance against the government, and a legitimate, very legitimate grievance. He went as far as the king's gate, for no one was to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth, right? It's all about how you look, baby. It's all about what you're wearing. In each and every province where the command and decree of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay on sackcloth and ashes. This was bad news indeed. Then Esther's maidens and her eunuchs came, as we all have maidens and eunuchs. Well, this is what the queen had in Persia. And her eunuchs came and told her, and the queen writhed in great anguish. This is a great word, to writhe, to imagine the emotional gut punch that she is hearing. Because again, she is in a tremendous position of power as queen. But as queen and not king, her power, though great, is very constrained. It's great in theory, but practicality, she has very little power. But there she is in a position of political influence, and her family and her people are going to be destroyed. So she writhed in great anguish. And she sent garments to clothe Mordecai, that he might remove his sackcloth from, "You're making me look bad," but he wouldn't accept them. So Esther summoned Hathach from the king's eunuchs, whom the king had appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. So Hathach went out to Mordecai to the city square in front of the king's gates. So what's happening, Mordecai? Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. When we're dealing with political issues, it is a timeless truth that the most logical and safest conclusion that one can draw as to why political decisions are made is to follow the money, right? Follow the money. And the king's treasuries, he wins two ways. The treasuries are filled, and he is removed from these domestic troublemakers, these insurrectionists. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict, which had issued in Susa for the destruction, that he might show Esther and inform her, and to order her to go into the king to implore his favor and to plead with him for her people. You have political influence. What good is political influence and position if you do not use it when your people need it? Your countrymen need you. Hathach came back and related Mordecai's words to Esther. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and ordered him to reply to Mordecai. It's so hard with social distancing, the enthusiasm. But you're doing great. You're doing great. All the king's servants and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king, to the inner court, who's not summoned, he has but one law, that he be put to death. Talk about put a do not disturb sign. This guy really means it, right? When my wife or my son or my cat comes into my office when I'm working, sometimes I don't like to be disturbed, but this is really ridiculous here. He has but one law, that whoever disturbs him, be put to death. Real temperamental king. Unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter, the symbol of his rule, symbol of his favor, so that he may live. And I'm not exactly out of favor, but I'm not particularly in favor, because I've not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. He's got a harem, after all, and I've been on an extended break from the king. So if I were to come to him and he extends his scepter, okay, great, I can. But the chances of him extending his scepter to me, since he hasn't summoned me for the past month, I risk violating his indifference to me. That really would be taking my life in my hands. There's always reasons, and some very, very good reasons. This is a very good reason, I think. It's very reasonable. Why not to act politically? Why not to risk politically? There are always very, very good reasons, decent reasons, why not to act. But if we don't act, or the instance of Esther, if she didn't act, then disaster would befall her nation, her people. They related Esther's words to Mordecai. It's hard because you're doing the telephone thing, you know. She's talking to him and he's talking to Mordecai, back and forth. It's like high school, but in a royal political way. It's like watching The Crown, but 3,000 years earlier. Then Mordecai told them the reply to Esther. And here's where Mordecai, her cousin, but he has served as her parent, substitute parent. He served as her authority figure. And sometimes we have to hear from our authority figures. Sometimes we have to hear. We make our excuses and we have good reasons why not to act. But sometimes the voice of authority speaks in our lives. And that's the case as it is here. Do not imagine that you are in the king's palace, just because you're close to the position of power right now, that you can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. Let's stop right there. If you don't act, God's still got it covered for the Jewish people, right? Mordecai's theology is pretty squared away. He understands that relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. He can be confident that God is going to protect at least some of the Jewish people. Even though you, the ones who were close to the position of power, who could have acted and didn't act, you and I and all of those close to us here in the city, we will perish. The Jewish people will not be wiped out, but we will be wiped out. Right? So you can't eradicate the Jewish people, but you can eradicate a whole lot of them at one time. Now, where is he getting this from? Again, God's not mentioned in Esther, but God is presumed. And the Abrahamic covenant found in Genesis 12 and following. First of all, Abrahamic covenant says, I will bless those who bless you. Whoever curses you, I will curse. All the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So there is a retributive justice that is locked into the basic covenant that was given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that is, those who are kind, those who bless the Jewish people, will receive divine blessing. Those who attack the Jewish people, those who curse the Jewish people, those who kill the Jewish people, God will respond in kind. If you curse the Jewish people, you will be divinely cursed. So that's part of his understanding, that the nation will suffer if they actually wipe out the Jewish people. Everybody's going to lose in that sense. But we have the concept of the new covenant given by Jeremiah. And apparently Mordecai is familiar with this concept here, because Jeremiah says in Jeremiah 31, "Thus says the Lord, who gives the sun for light by day and the fixed order of the moon and stars for light by night, who stirs up the sea so that its waves roar." In other words, the mighty God of the world. The Lord of hosts, the Lord of armies, that's what hosts means, is his name. If this fixed order, what fixed order? The sun for light and the fixed order of the moon and the stars, right? If the signs in the heavens, the sun, the moon, the star, if this fixed order departs from before me, declares the Lord, then the offspring of Israel also will cease from being a nation before me forever. So, in other words, we can be very confident that no matter who tries to destroy the Jewish people, no matter what era, no matter what nation, that it will be an impossible task to completely, you can do a lot of damage to the Jewish people, absolutely. But it will be an impossible task to completely destroy the Jewish people, based upon God's declaration of preservation for his people. The Jewish people are the apple of God's eye, as he has said in Zechariah. You come against the Jewish people, it's like poking me in the eye. And God, like so many of us, if somebody walks up to us and gives us a good poke in the eye, we will react. It's just that God has more power to react than we do. Thus says the Lord, if the heavens above can be measured and the foundations of the earth searched out below, then I will also cast off all the offspring of Israel for all they have done. In other words, it's not going to happen. And let's be honest, my people, not always peaches. Okay? They're not always the paragons of virtue, my people Israel, but nonetheless, I will not destroy Israel off the face of the earth. So no matter what this Persian provincial leader has planned, it will not succeed in total. So we get back now to the Esther story. If you remain silent, deliverance, relief will arise from another place, even though you, me, will die. And who knows whether, and this is, of course, the great line that is memorable from Esther, who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this? Who knows that you have not attained your political position for such a time as this? Then Esther told them the reply to Mordecai, go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa, fast from me. Do not eat or drink 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens also will fast in the same way. And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law. I think I've made myself clear on that. And if I perish, I perish. I will risk not only my political capital, but I will risk my life to attempt to preserve my people, to use my level of influence in the sphere in which God has placed me. Damn the torpedoes, whatever the consequences may be. So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him, skipping a little bit. When the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, she comes forward to him. She obtained favor at his sight, and the king extended to Esther the golden scepter which is in his hand. So she is able to tell the king the problem. Esther said, if it pleases the king, may the king and Haman come this day to the banquet that I prepared for him. So instead of telling the king the problem at hand, Esther delays. Why? Unclear. Why didn't she just lay it out? She get a last-minute set of jitters? Is this her ultimate plan? Feed him, ply him with wine, give him a good massage, and then make sure he's in Listen, let's be honest. I know there's a lot of wives who butter their husbands up like this as well. I see it on Dick Van Dyke all the time, and I Love Lucy. But come to a banquet. She didn't tell him the problem. Just come to a banquet. And bring Haman, too. And Haman went out that day, glad and pleased at heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he did not stand up or even tremble before him, raising the bar, Haman was filled with anger against Mordecai. Haman controlled himself, however, went to his house and sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh. Then Haman recounted to them the glory of his riches and the number of his sons in every instance where the king had magnified him and how he promoted him above the princes and servants of the king. Haman also said, even Esther the queen, let no one but me come with the queen to the banquet, the king with the banquet, which she had prepared. And tomorrow also I am invited by her with the king. Dig how important I am, honey. There's a lot of spouses who do that as well. And brag to their wives. Look, what a big man I am, right? To which no wife has ever said, every wife has basically said, yeah, big man. But yet all of this does not satisfy me every time I see Mordecai, the Jew, sitting, God bless me, sitting at the king's gate. So it's like a stone in his sandal. He can't enjoy what he has, and he's got so much, but he can't enjoy it because of one lousy Jewish guy who refuses to pay him homage. Then Zeresh's wife and all his friends said to him, here's an idea. Have a gallows 50 cubits high made, and in the morning ask the king. This is like a 75-foot high gallows. This is a huge gallows. It's ridiculous. It's talk about overkill, right? This is like something being, this is like standing in front of faux Greek columns to make a speech. You know, this is really overkill. In the morning, ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go joyfully, because it's always joyful when somebody, your enemies, get hung. Then go joyfully with the king to the banquet. So the king said, who's in the court? And Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace in order to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows, which he had prepared for him. The king's servant said, behold, Haman is standing in the court. The king said, let him come in. Now, here's what I skipped over. King couldn't sleep. And so sometimes, it's good to listen to a book on tape, something like that, to help you get to sleep. And the king has the original version of book on tape. He has a servant read to him from the annals of the kingdom and political, and he usually will write it. And what he discovers in the annals of the kingdom is that Mordecai had actually warned of a plot against the king's life, and Mordecai had never been rewarded for identifying the perpetrators and calling them out before this plot. This is like an episode of 24, right? If 24 were to tell the story of Esther, you'd see the whole plot unfolding. It would take like 3-4 hours to see the plot unfolding that Mordecai that he foils. But anyway, he'd never been rewarded. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, what is to be done for the man whom the king desires to honor? And Haman said to himself, whom would the king desire to honor more than me? But he doesn't know it's going to be Mordecai, right? Then the king said to Haman, take quickly the robes and the horse as you have said, and do so for Mordecai the Jew, who is sitting at the king's gate. Do not fall short in anything of all that you had said. Because Haman is like, if this is all going to come to me, then give me a horse and give me a robe, and the king's ring. Let it be very exciting and let me be completely honored, right? It's got a self-esteem issue very clearly for him to be so needy of applause and accolades. There are some people like that in politics who always need the acclaim of others to feel that they are okay. And if you see one person who doesn't like you, your whole day is ruined. But anyway, so what Haman wanted for himself, Mordecai is going to get. So Haman took the robe and the horse and arrayed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city square and proclaimed before him, thus it is done to the man whom the king desires to honor. Now, nobody really knows the humiliation that this is for Haman. But Haman knows. And inwardly, surely he is seething with shame, with resentment, with anger, and the rest. And Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried home, mourning with his head covered. It's as if somebody died. That's how disturbed he is. Haman recounted to Zeresh his wife and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Then his wise men and Zeresh his wife said to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish origin, you shall not overcome him. Why? Abrahamic covenant, Genesis 12:3. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. She's savvy wife. Listen to your wives, listen to your spouse. Right? It's a good lesson. If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish origin, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. The king and Haman came to drink wine with Esther the queen. And the king said to Esther on the second day, also as they drank their wine at the banquet. So this is day 2 of the banquet. What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to half of the kingdom, it shall be done. Queen Esther replied, if I found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me as my petition. I'm petitioning for my life and for the lives of my people. That is my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Now, if we'd only been sold as slaves, men and women, I would have remained silent, for the trouble would not be commensurate with the annoyance to the king. And King Ahasuerus asked Queen Esther, then who is he, and where is he, and who would presume to do this? Esther revealing that she is Jewish and that her people are doomed. Ahasuerus, having a short memory, apparently, a lot on his mind, all the harem and the drinking and the insomnia that he has. Esther said, a foe and an enemy is this wicked Haman. And Haman became terrified before the king and queen, rightfully so. The king arose in his anger from drinking wine and went into the palace garden. He's so steamed, he can't even look at this guy. But Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm had been determined against him by the king. When the dominoes of the Lord begin to fall against you, you better act quickly before they all fall down and the chips are completely fallen. Now, when the king returned from his palace garden into the place where they were drinking wine, where they were having the banquet, Haman, remember what he's begging for his life. That's what's happening. Haman is begging for his life from Queen Esther. So Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. You can imagine him begging. He's down on his knees, and on his knees because she's on a couch. He's at her knees. And the king said, will he even assault the queen with me in the house? So the king walks in, sees this guy on his knees before the queen on the couch, and thinks that he's attacking the queen sexually. And so the king walks in, sees this, and says, this will not stand. As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. If the king was going to have any mercy, any pity on Haman, Haman's really sunk himself now. It's over. Then Harbonah, one of the eunuchs who went before the king, said, behold, indeed, the gallows standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high, 75 feet high, which we've all seen, we've all noticed it, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king. And the king said, hang him on it. And this political thriller turns upside down. What you think is going to happen is the opposite of what happens. But the Jews who were in Susa assembled on the 13th or 14th of the same month. They rested the 15th day. They made a day. So what happens is, because the laws can't be changed, some silly Persian, Medio-Persian rule couldn't change the word of the king was its law, but what the king was able to do was allow the Jewish people to defend themselves from the soldiers who were going to execute them. Talk about boxing yourself into a corner, but that's what happens. We see this kind of thing happen with the rabbis all the time. The rabbis create extra rules to make sure that the Torah's 613 original laws are safeguarded. So they'll create, instead from the 613, they'll create 60,000 other rules and then realize, well, if that's the case, then we really can't function. So we have to, since we've made a ruling, we need to create another ruling to circumvent the ruling and create a circumstance where we can circumvent our previous ruling. Same concept. So the Jewish people, they defend themselves. They rest on the 15th day, made it a day of feasting and rejoicing. Therefore, the Jews of the rural areas who live in rural towns make the 14th day of the month Adar a holiday for rejoicing and feasting and sending portions of food to one another. It's one of the things we do for this holiday is to give other people food. Send portions, and portions being plural, at least 2 packages, 2 gift baskets, if you will, of food to help rejoice to one another. And you have walled cities, for whatever reason, walled cities observe this for 2 days, unwalled cities just for 1 day. Then Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews who were in the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, obliging them to celebrate the 14th day of the month Adar and the 15th day of the same month annually. Now, what authority did Mordecai have to oblige the Jewish people in perpetuity to observe this day? Nothing lasting. He didn't have that kind of power. But because the event is so powerful and resonates in the Jewish consciousness, the Jewish people are happy to observe this. They find value in observing this day. Because on these days, the Jews rid themselves of their enemies, and it was a month that was turned for them from sorrow into gladness, from mourning into a holiday. And they should make them days of feasting and rejoicing and sending portions of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So, come to this more, but we don't have time. You get the gist of the story. So here we have a story, a political story. Intrigue, machinations, all kinds of things. And it's basically, if you break it down, it's a story of people who find themselves with a specific quantity of political influence. Maybe a little bit of political influence, maybe a lot of but we find people with political influence. And it's all about how they use the political influence that they have. Will they, when they can use their political clout and influence, when they can use it for good, will they stand up and do so? Or will they simply say, I'm just one person, I can't do anything even though I'm in a position of some influence, not ultimate influence, but some influence. I can't do anything. Let other people intervene, let other people speak. Let events transpire as they're going to transpire. I don't really want to take a risk. Why should I risk my position for a political statement? Mordecai has made a political statement. Esther makes a political statement. You see, even Mordecai, even when he doesn't have to, finding out about this plot and making the plot against the king known, obviously he doesn't do it for gain because he doesn't receive anything. Mordecai is never recognized for his good deed until much later we see the story. All of us, as Americans, we have a particular sphere of influence. God has placed each one of us in a position not of a lot of power. None of us hold office here, but because in America the government is of the people, by the people, and for the people, We all have some stake. We all have some clout. We all have some skin in the game. And so the question for us is, will the church, when given the opportunity, and of course, as a group, we have more clout than as individuals, but even individuals can slay giants. When given the opportunity to act on our political convictions, will we do so in the public square? When we see someone canceled in the culture, will we stand up for that person? Or will we back away so as not to catch cooties, so as not to absorb some of the odor of the canceled? When a business is canceled, will we stand up and support that business? When an individual becomes a pariah, will we stand up? When we see injustice being done, will we stand up? Each one of us has been put in place in the 21st century for such a time as this. Are our times in the 21st century any less important than events that happened in the 5th century? This is our time. And the story of Esther resonates, and the words of Esther resonate to all of us down through the ages, 2,500 years later. And said, I have been put here for such a time as this. So I will act, and if I perish, I perish. If there are consequences, if my Facebook friends unfriend me, if my social networks collapse, if I receive tremendously negative responses on Twitter, or if my boss is embarrassed of the position and demands that I recant my statement, will we perish? So we perish, we perish? Or will we say, yeah, if I perish, that won't be so good, so I'll backtrack and I won't say anything at all. This is our time. We have been put in place for such a time as this. So the question that I want you to think about is, what place, what position of influence? We don't have any Esthers here, right? None of us are queens, right? None of us are kings. None of us are premiers. But Mordecai wasn't a king. He wasn't a premier. He was just a guy. Just a guy. But he had been placed for such a time as this, and he acted. What place of influence has God placed you? Where have you been placed? Who are the people around you that you've been placed among? Who are the people that you influence for such a time as this? What would God have you do in relation to the events of the day? Because you know, I'm not a very political guy. And I'm very uncomfortable talking about politics. And I would never tell you and direct you what to do. But in this instance, I believe that we all have a role to play. Question you have to ask the Lord, that's very personal, is what role does He, if any, does God want you to play in the events of today? We're in a very interesting time. We're in a very critical time for the future, especially for those of us who have children and grandchildren and people who care about the future. This is our moment. Will we rise to meet it?